theme: 3 jets, 1 unstoppable machine. If those images just lit something up in the back of your brain, you're exactly where you need to be. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Before Voltron, before Transformers, before every combining robot you ever loved, there was one show that started the whole avalanche. And it was wilder, darker, and more influential than you probably remember. If the hidden history of giant robot anime is your thing, subscribing means you get the next deep dive the day it drops, not 6 months later when the algorithm finally decides you're worthy. Now, let's get into it.
Second, go! Arrow, go!
Number 10, the show that built the blueprint for Voltron. You've been giving Voltron the credit for an idea it didn't actually invent. Getter Robo's pioneering mechanic, 3 separate machines combining into multiple distinct robot configurations, was so genuinely revolutionary that it became the direct creative blueprint for other iconic super robot series that followed. According to Anime News Network's comprehensive history of the franchise, Getter Robo's influence on the eventual creation of Voltron was significant and foundational, not incidental. Think about that for a second. Every time you watched Voltron form up as a kid, every time those lions locked into place and the crowd went wild in your living room, you were watching an idea that had already been perfected a decade earlier on Japanese television. Getter Robo didn't just participate in the super robot genre, it essentially wrote the rulebook that every show after it was working from. The debt the entire combining robot tradition owes to this 1974 series is genuinely staggering, and it almost never gets acknowledged in Western pop culture conversations. Getter Robo is the quiet giant standing behind every giant robot you ever loved. Number 9, a sacrifice that actually meant something. This show killed off a main character before killing off main characters was a prestige TV flex. In the show's memorable finale, original pilot Musashi Tomoe made the ultimate sacrifice, giving his life in the final battle against the Dinosaur Empire to ensure Getter Robo's victory and protect Earth from a desperate last assault. This wasn't a fake-out death, a convenient revival, or a post-credits reversal. According to Wikipedia's documentation of the series, Musashi's end was final, impactful, and deliberately permanent. For a 1974 children's robot anime, that was a genuinely bold creative choice. Saturday morning television in that era, on both sides of the Pacific, was not exactly in the habit of asking young audiences to process real grief alongside their giant robot action sequences. Musashi was the heart of the team, the grounded brawler who kept Ryoma and Hayato from tearing each other apart every episode. Losing him hit differently than most cartoon deaths. It was the show telling you, straight-faced, that the stakes were real. That's a move even some modern shows are still afraid to make. Number 8. The team was one argument away from collapse at all times. Earth's greatest defenders spent almost as much energy fighting each other as fighting the enemy. The dynamic among Getter Robo's 3 core pilots was famously, consistently, gloriously dysfunctional. Ryoma, the hot-headed leader, clashed constantly with the cold, calculating Hayato, while Musashi, the team's big, straightforward brawler, typically served as the reluctant, emotional anchor keeping the whole arrangement from completely falling apart. This wasn't background flavor. It was a central tension the show leaned into across its entire run. These 3 genuinely did not always like each other, and the writing didn't paper over that with easy bonding moments or convenient team-building episodes. You got the sense that at any given moment, the Getter Robo combination might fail simply because the guys inside it were too busy being furious at each other. For its era, that kind of character friction was surprisingly sophisticated storytelling. Most super robot shows of the period gave you competent cooperative heroes. Getter Robo gave you 3 guys who happened to also form a giant robot. Big difference. And honestly, way more entertaining. Number 7. The villains were never just monsters. The Dinosaur Empire had a case, and the show knew it. The primary antagonists of the original series, known as the Hyozoku in Japan, were portrayed as far more than rampaging creatures looking for destruction. They were an ancient, advanced civilization of evolved dinosaurs who had lived underground for millions of years and genuinely believed they were reclaiming Earth as their rightful domain from an upstart species that had taken over while they were gone. That framing gave the conflict a moral weight you didn't typically find in 1974 giant robot television. The Dinosaur Empire wasn't wrong about their history. Earth had been theirs first, humanity arriving, thriving, and then being defended by a giant robot powered by cosmic energy was, from their perspective, just the latest indignity in a very long story. The show never fully resolved that philosophical tension, and it was probably smarter for leaving it open. Sometimes your heroic robot is fighting something that has a legitimate grievance. That ambiguity is part of what gave Getter Robo a texture that its contemporaries simply didn't have. Number 6. The energy source that could also destroy you. The fuel powering Earth's greatest protector could also turn you into something unrecognizable. Getter rays, the mysterious cosmic energy source that powers Getter Robo, are not simply a clean, heroic fuel. According to the franchise's own documentation, these rays carry a dangerous secondary effect. They are capable of accelerating evolution and mutation, transforming biological organisms into monstrous, unpredictable forms. So the same energy that makes Getter Robo capable of saving the world is also fundamentally a force that can warp living things beyond recognition. That dark irony was embedded in the show's original concept and became one of the most enduring and compelling threads running through the entire franchise across its many iterations and sequel series. In practical terms, it meant that the heroes were piloting a machine powered by something genuinely dangerous and not entirely understood. There's something almost nuclear-age about that anxiety. Tremendous power, extraordinary risk, and the constant question of whether the cure might eventually become its own kind of catastrophe. Heavy material for a cartoon about giant robots. Very heavy. Number 5. America got a different show entirely. By the time Getter Robo reached American TV, it had been completely rebuilt from the inside out. When Getter Robo G, the direct sequel series, was brought to the United States as Starvengers as part of the Force 5 syndication package, it went through extensive transformation of its own. Scenes were edited, plot points were altered, and character names were overhauled to suit American broadcast standards. Ryoma, the fiery lead pilot, became, and this is real, Star Dragon. Let that land for a moment. The Force 5 package bundled several Japanese super robot series together for American distribution, which meant localization choices were made quickly, commercially, and not always with tremendous reverence for the source material. American kids in the late 70s got a version of this universe that had been sanded, repackaged, and given new wallpaper. Fun show, certainly, but a genuinely different experience from what Japanese audiences had in 1974. It's worth remembering how radically the pipeline between Japanese animation and American living rooms used to transform the product along the way. You often weren't watching the show, you were watching an interpretation of the show. Number 4. 3 forms. 3 completely different machines. Getter Robo wasn't just versatile. Each form was essentially a specialized weapon system in its own right. Each of Getter Robo's 3 distinct configurations was engineered around entirely different combat environments and capabilities. Getter 1 was the aerial powerhouse, built for flight and direct assault, wielding the iconic Getter Tomahawk in close-quarters combat. Getter 2 was the speed and drilling specialist, capable of burrowing and maneuvering in ways the other forms couldn't match. Getter 3 handled the heavy lifting, literally, and was specifically optimized for underwater operations. This wasn't just cosmetic variety. The 3-form system meant that the team had to read each combat situation correctly and choose the right configuration before engaging. That decision-making layer added a tactical dimension to the action that most super robot shows of the era simply didn't bother with. It also meant that the same basic toy, and yes, the merchandising implications were very much part of the design logic, could represent 3 genuinely distinct play scenarios. Clever engineering in the writer's room and the toy factory, working in complete harmony. Number 3. The first combining robot in anime history. Full stop. Not one of the first, the first. There's a difference. Getter Robo holds the verified distinction of being the very first transforming and combining robot in anime history. The 3-machine combination system, the Eagle, Jaguar, and Bear jets locking together into a fully operational giant robot, was not an evolution of something that already existed. It was an original invention, built from scratch, with no direct precedent in the medium. According to both Anime News Network's franchise history and Mecha Bay's dedicated documentation, this mechanic set an entirely new creative standard for how giant robots could be conceptualized and integrated into serialized storytelling. The combining robot trope that would go on to define entire decades of animation began right here in 1974 with this specific show. Every Power Rangers team-up formation, every Voltron lion sequence, every Constructicon merge in Transformers history. All of it traces its creative DNA back to Getter Robo. That's not an exaggeration. That's just the historical record, and it deserves to be said plainly and loudly. Number 2. The girl pilot they almost made you forget about. Dr. Sao Tome's daughter was out there in active combat the entire time, and somehow that gets overlooked constantly. Michiru Sao Tome, daughter of the brilliant and occasionally reckless Dr. Sao Tome, was not merely a background character providing moral support from the sidelines. She was a trained, capable pilot of the Getter Q, a dedicated support aircraft integral to Getter Robo's overall operational capacity. According to the franchise's own documentation, Michiru regularly engaged in direct combat alongside the main team, demonstrating genuine skill and bravery across numerous missions. In 1974, that was not a standard creative choice for a giant robot action series. Female characters in the super robot genre of that era were typically defined by their relationship to the male leads, rather than their independent competence in the field. Michiru actually flew the plane into the fight repeatedly. She tends to get undersold in retrospective discussions of the show, overshadowed by the louder, more combustible personalities of Ryoma, Hayato, and Musashi. But if you go back and watch the series with fresh eyes, she's quietly holding a significant piece of the operation together from episode to episode. Number 1. The show was always supposed to be much darker. What you watched as a kid was the toned-down version. The original concept was something else entirely. Early drafts of Getter Robo reflected the full creative vision of co-creator Ken Ishikawa, whose signature style ran considerably darker and more visceral than standard television fare of the period. These initial concepts included genuinely disturbing depictions of Getter Ray-induced mutations, biological transformations of a graphic and unsettling nature, that were significantly scaled back to meet Japanese television broadcast standards before the series ever reached air. According to Anime News Network's detailed franchise history, Ishikawa's original sensibility pushed the material toward territory that the broadcast environment of 1974 simply wasn't prepared to accommodate. What audiences ultimately received was a substantially lighter adaptation of a much more intense creative vision. The show you remember, exciting, dramatic, occasionally poignant, was already a compromise. This makes the franchise's later manga and OVA iterations, where Ishikawa's darker instincts were finally given room to breathe, feel almost like a correction, like the original story finally getting to exist on its own terms. The 1974 anime was the beginning, but in some ways, it was also Getter Robo wearing a mask. Bonus fact: the 3 jets that changed everything. Before the combining mechanic became commonplace, this specific mechanical system was genuinely unlike anything in animation. Getter Robo's 3-machine transformation concept utilized 3 distinct jets: the Eagle, Jaguar, and Bear, each capable of combining in a different sequence to produce a completely different robot form. This wasn't a single transformation with cosmetic variations. The arrangement of the jets determined the outcome, making the combination itself a meaningful mechanical and narrative choice, rather than a simple visual effect. This system provided the show with unparalleled combat versatility, allowing the team to optimize Getter Robo for aerial, ground, or underwater engagement, depending on the specific threat they were facing. For audiences in 1974, watching this play out across the series was witnessing something that had never existed in animation before: a giant robot that was functionally 3 different weapons depending on how you assembled it. Going back to fact 10, that's precisely the mechanic that Voltron inherited and popularized globally. The Eagle, Jaguar, and Bear jets were the original model. Everything that came after was standing on their wings. So there it is. 50 years of Getter Robo, and the story is somehow bigger and more interesting than most people realize. The first combining robot in history, power source with a dark evolutionary secret, a female pilot who never got enough credit, a show that was already a softened version of something far more intense, and a creative fingerprint stamped across every giant robot cartoon you grew up loving. Getter Robo didn't just participate in the golden age of super robot anime, it built the foundation the rest of the era stood on. Now it's your turn. Drop it in the comments. Which fact actually got you? Was it the Voltron connection, Musashi's sacrifice, or the fact that the show you watched was already the tame version? Let's hear it. Until next time, keep the 3 jets flying, keep the combination locked, and remember, Getter Robo did it first.